Okay, I've hit record.
All right. All right.
So people do this with me, ask each other to introduce ourselves. Do you want to say a brief bit about your work, what you do?
Sure. I'm Kristine Lauria. I've been a midwife for 37 years now. I was trained as a traditional midwife. I worked in communities and I did my apprenticeship primarily in an Amish community, which is plain, the plain
Is that
communities.
without technology?
Electricity, technology, running water. They live on farms, they drive buggies. Yeah. So the plain communities, and they're still very much like this. There are some that are a little more progressive. There are Amish, there are Mennonite. So the Mennonites are somewhat more progressive, but still fairly conservative. And they're pacifists and so forth. So that being said, the significance of that is that they are born at home, they die at home, so they very much are aware of the life cycle. And so when you're dealing with populations like that, you have a very holistic view of birth and death and pretty much the whole life cycle. So I was so privileged to be exposed to birth for the first few years. And I did work with non-Amish also, but being exposed to the Amish, their matter-of-fact way about birth really influenced me, really up until this day. And so I was a community midwife for many, many years. And in 2019, I applied to MSF, Doctors Without Borders, and so I've been on several assignments with them in very resource poor settings, all in different places all over the world. And so I do that part of the time now. And then I also teach for Breech Without Borders as an instructor. And I teach all over the world as well, breech skills and multiples as well. So
Wonderful.
that's it
And
in a
those
nutshell.
multiples, let's start at the end and go backwards. Have you ever been with triplets? I know that you have.
Yes, yes, I have. I have out in the field with MSF. I have attended a number of them, and of course, we have a whole staff, and it's still a very rural setting, and it is not a hospital, but it's not like being at home and having a family make a decision to have planned home birth with triplets. And a few years ago, I was invited to my first triplet birth. It was in the US. I won't specifically state where. And after that, about 10 months after that birth, I attended another triplet birth at home. And then another 9 months after that birth, another one. So it's the first time I was ever asked to attend a triplet birth in all the years that I practiced, and I did. And so now I've attended a total of three at home. And I've supported one virtually I supported another midwife who was helping somebody, and the family asked me to be there virtually, and that also was lovely. So it went
And
well.
some in hospital or birth centers?
No, that was at home as well. Yeah.
Okay, incredible experience. And so you mentioned MSF, Medicine Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. Did that give you the opportunity to get high number and high quality experiences, particularly
Yeah,
with
it did.
Breech? Yeah.
hmm Yes, it did. I do attend a lot of births sometimes when I'm on assignment with them. It depends on what the project is specifically. Some of them have bigger maternity components than others, but when there is a large maternity component and a high volume, then I am doing very large numbers. I also worked with Emergency, that is an Italian NGO. And they have some projects I think they have one in South Sudan or in Sudan. I'm not sure which one. And they also have one
Afghanistan.
in Afghanistan. And I attended, I was in the Anaba maternity in Afghanistan with them. They have projects in different places in the world, but that's the one that I was in. And so we attended about 700 births a month. roughly. So then that's a lot of breaches and multiples in that kind of setting.
If anybody watching this was interested to get experience, particularly in breech, but also more holistic outside the guidelines, outside the hospital work, is there a geographical place, a country, or a particular region that you think is good, or is it very individual? Because there's different cultural and religious and other things to consider, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. It is it does depend on where you're coming from and where you what specifically you want in terms of experience and what your motivations are, I think, as
Even
well.
here in Europe, Frankfurt's got a great centre for breech birth.
Hmm.
Stuttgart has a great centre, slightly more medicalized because it's run by
Hmm.
doctors and births are done by doctors, whereas Frankfurt
Hmm.
midwives can also be attending the woman and facilitating breech birth. But they're
Hmm.
great models that are happening. And then other countries will say, oh, it's banned, you can't do it, it's against the rules. And then
Right.
sometimes midwives or doctors might lose their license if they're caring for somebody. Do you come across that side of things? Um,
Not when, only when I'm talking to other practitioners and I'm teaching and they've come from environments like that, then I hear about it. But when I am traveling or if I'm out in the field with MSF, I'm not hearing so much about that, except for the fact that and I'm not dealing with it. We're doing everything vaginally, but I will hear sometimes from national staff in certain places that they weren't trained to do these things and that they're considered very high risk when we're talking about breaches or multiples. And so they tend to be somewhat fearful, which always surprises me since these things happen all the time in places, especially when there's high volume, and yet they're still very fearful. So,
it's
so I,
funny,
I
the
still do encounter it.
hospitals have a hierarchy and the consultant is at the top, and they may never have been at a vaginal breech birth.
Right.
There's a legal case in the US of Angie Hock, and the obstetrician that criticized the woman had a surprise breech presentation. The midwife did the best she could. They transferred to hospital. The baby died in the hospital. And the obstetrician gynecologist said that would not have happened in hospital. But when she was asked during the trial, has she ever been at a breech birth? Yes, many, meaning at cesareans when they reach
Hmm.
inside and pull the baby out. But apart from that, none. So if you've got the consultant at the top of the hierarchy with zero experience of vaginal breech birth, that's got to say something because I know decades ago people had that experience and then it just stops. Why did it
Yes.
stop, do you think?
Well, I think that it was starting to the cesarean rate was starting to go up anyway, and I think less and less doctors were comfortable attending breaches. They were using breach as an excuse to do cesarean, and slowly it was already on the way out. And then the term breach trial study came out in 2000, and then they all had great justification for stopping
Quite
doing.
unfortunate, wasn't it? I was going to ask you about percentages. When you mentioned the Amish Mennonite communities, and I remember Ina May Gaskin talked about 95% of women were fine without interventions, pretty much any
Mhm.
interventions.
Mhm.
How did you find the intervention rate? How many could be carrying on at home birth who really needed to go in?
Yeah, it was a pretty low intervention rate and it's a pretty low transport rate. I mean, I think maybe my cesarean section rate at that time was with home birth, I think overall was about 3%. So not very high. And again, I wasn't dealing also with the same population that they do in the hospital. However, I did attend breaches and I did attend multiples. So that in
Yeah.
hospitals is considered higher risk. So to say they were all just, singleton, full term, perfectly healthy mother, yes,
Were they
a good
grand
majority of
multips
them were.
having more than
Yeah.
five babies, some of them?
Right. Yes. Then you
Maybe
have the
10.
grand mal tips. In the Amish communities. I in one 24-hour period, I helped an Amish woman have her 11th baby and another one have her 18th baby. So we're talking about grand mal tips. And the chances of hemorrhage there are so incredibly high. I mean, their uterus doesn't even want to work to get the baby out, let alone to contract for. So I remember those births very vividly and learning really very acutely how just because somebody's had so many babies, no, that doesn't mean they're just going to spit them right out. Three or four, that's okay. But when you get to those higher numbers, the uterus is like, this again? Do you know how old we are? It doesn't want to work as
It
well.
is curious. I found in my practice, one woman comes to mind. She was having baby number 10. She was kind of Amish, had her own version of Amish community. And she was actually one of the healthiest women in her mid 40s. And I could have
Hmm.
somebody in their mid 20s, far less healthy, partly diet.
Hmm.
If people are on fast food diet, high sugar, all the other things, maybe smoking, some
Yeah.
alcohol, just because of lifestyle addictions, disconnection, trauma, those things. So some people, I found the city population always much more complex than a rural population. People in touch with the land, farming, seem to have different expectations as well about pregnancy, labour, birth, and caring for the baby. I
Hmm.
guess you might echo some of that if you were with these communities.
Yes.
Have you been in cities as well?
Yes, I have. Oh gosh, in Ohio, when I was doing my apprenticeship, I was also attending births in Columbus, the greater Columbus area, where Ohio State University is, um, and so yeah, there and Washington D.C., bigger cities,
Right.
and the metropolitan area, the greater metropolitan area of D.C.
And
as
throughout
well.
the
So.
US, it really varies that you don't have to have a license in certain states, I understand.
Mhm.
It's very different in different places. But you've been around the world, Australia, New Zealand. How did that strike you down there? Any positives or differences? I imagine you had a good welcome.
Yes. Yes, I think Australia, it's interesting because they're in their own bit of sort of crisis, growing pains. I'm not exactly sure. It's such an enormous country, and you get actually very different stories in different parts of the country depending on where the midwives are and what's happening. But there's a quite a big rebellion sort of happening there, and there's a lot of free birth that happens because a lot of the people are really very much even against the more medicalized midwifery as they're calling it or seeing it, and so they're tending more towards free birth. Whereas in New Zealand, as you know, it's a very small country, a very lovely country, one of my favorite places, and I think that that's as close to an ideal situation as you're going to get. There's not so much of a hierarchy in the now it's of course the midwives have told me it's different in different places in New Zealand, just like anywhere. But for example, in the South Island, the midwives that I talked to, I worked with teaching with midwives and physicians, and you couldn't tell in that room full of 30 people who was who. There
Yeah.
didn't appear to be a hierarchy. It was very collegial, and they talked back and forth. Like it wasn't like, well, I'm the doctor and I'm telling you it's this way. It was not. There was no posturing. There was very much discourse back and forth between doctors and midwives, and they everybody was on a first name basis. It's not a hierarchical sort of situation. And my understanding is even their EMS staff they're trained to work along with the midwives and support the midwives when there's a home birth transfer and all of it. It's just this really beautiful
Yeah. Well, one of the great things,
situation.
having lived
Yeah,
and worked both all around Australia and New Zealand for decades, one of the
yeah.
great things, I've forgotten, there's so many great things there. Um, I mean, the money follows the woman. I remember now. The point is, there's no medical negligence suing in New Zealand because they have
Right.
no fault compensation scheme. like Sweden, I believe, also has. So instead of people being focused on defending their practice so much, instead of doing what's best for the mother and baby, New Zealand, they can have a conversation, work in partnership with the woman and be quite brave and courageous and go down different paths. Whereas in other countries, if we break the rule by the insurance company or something else, we might get sued. And
Yes.
just that possibility is enough for them to do what I think is quite shocking practice, like at 42 weeks saying, well, you've got to have either a cesarean or an induction. She may not really be 42 weeks. If the baby's
Right.
well, pregnancy's well, why not continue? So certain countries have more flexibility, but you've been out in Bangladesh and Africa. Um, have you been in South America, maybe Brazil?
Yes. hmm
How
Not
has
with
that been?
MSF, but I've attended births in Brazil. It's been a number of years, but yeah.
You know, my focus is also human rights, and some countries will have a manslaughter conviction, even when it's congenital abnormality of a baby, even when the baby's born in hospital and they transfer from home. Nobody's blamed in hospital, even when there's a destructive delivery, forceps, fractured skull, which happened just now in Moscow for the death of a baby. It's the midwives that are sanctioned or a home
hmm
birth doctor. But in Brazil, they've gone a step further and they've convicted the doctor and the midwife of murder, saying they were either had the intent to kill, which clearly they didn't, baby had congenital pneumonia, or they acted so, they didn't use the word reckless, but it's beyond reckless, indifferent to whether the baby lived or died. And of course they didn't. They did the best they can. Transferred to
Right.
hospital, baby's born in hospital, dies in hospital, and blame the home birth attendees. So I know that's my subject, it's dear to my heart. And I just wondered if you've been in Brazil, did you come across this humanization of childbirth, compassionate attitude, and the state telling everyone they've got to have a cesarean or the baby will die because the cord is wrapped around it 3 times, which seems to be the story that all women are told.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't find that so much. I was actually invited to come there to the Amazon to help a woman who couldn't. The one time that I was there was to help a woman that could not find anybody else to help her out of hospital, and she specifically wanted a water birth. So there were just no choices where she was in the Amazon, and I have friends who work in Brazil and in varying capacities in birth. And my understanding is that there's just, especially in the major metropolitan areas like Rio, there's just a very high cesarean section rate, like 80 to 90%
One of the
in some
highest in the
places.
world, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just elective cesareans.
It's quite a
So,
challenge across Central America, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, even Mexico. There's traditional birth attendants doing great work, but I'm wondering if this is like the 1% and the 99% is the system. It sometimes
mhm.
feels like we are the 1%, the families that
Yeah.
choose us.
Yeah,
So how is it?
absolutely.
Just now you did train the trainers. That must be a massive breakthrough for Breech Without Borders because a lot of it's been on your shoulders and your colleagues. It's a very
Yeah.
small number of you. Now that number's increased. What's that going to look like for Breach Without Borders going forward?
Yeah, no, I think I think it can be a good thing in that um when we have people who are teaching breech in their own countries, in their own language. It's culturally, I think, more appropriate, even though, you would think, well, the US culture, the European culture, it's not that different. It really can be different. And I'm talking about not just the cultural, culture, but the hospital culture, the birth culture is different wherever you go. There are similarities, but
Now
whenever
to
I'm
hear you
teaching,
say this, it makes me think of the Hungarians that came and learned with Breach Without Borders. They went home, they started teaching it, and some of the other hospitals are kind of catching up now. Maybe there's a sense
yes,
of competition
yes,
and pride, national pride. Well, if somebody else is
yes,
doing it, we can do it.
yeah,
And it
yeah,
had been blocked for
exactly.
decades, not moving forward, in my view, and now it has. So those
Yes,
learners become teachers.
yes, yeah. And the way I see it, it's not that they aren't receptive to me because I think I get pretty good reception when I go places. People seem to be happy with what they're learning. But if I can impart the knowledge and skills to people in their own communities, and then they're learning from their own colleagues, and they're
Yeah.
teaching people in their hospitals and in their birth communities, it's going to be way more effective. It doesn't mean I can't still go there once every couple years and teach a class and, refresh and update people or whatever, but they're going to be way more receptive when they're learning this information
Do you think we've
from
reached
the people that understand.
an exciting tipping point? So if I talk to people in various countries, they always say, well, since Breach Without Borders came, now we know we need what to do and how to do it. And if we can't do it, we call the person who's trained with them. So they massively respect it. Maybe we've reached a tipping point. What do you think?
Yeah, 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 I think so. And I think that I definitely see a change coming. There's still a lot of work to do, but you have to look, the way I see it is I just look at all of the work that's already been done. I look at all of the providers that are now attending breaches and are at least offering it to women as a viable choice, an alternative to cesarean section or even ECV. And so I just see it as a positive thing. And I think I think we're on the right path for sure.
Definitely. It has a great reputation. It's wonderful watching it grow and sometimes witnessing it in person with you and your colleagues. The UK, have you worked over there doing any workshops?
No, no, not so far. Mm-mm.
It's funny because there were these two philosophies. We had the breech extraction, with not just a philosophy, it was get your hands on the baby and pull. And
Hmm.
the other extreme was hands off the breech, do nothing. Even when the baby deteriorated, we should do something. And for me, it feels like you guys are much more, well, you cover the middle ground. Do nothing if that's fine, but as soon as you need to do something, do everything you need to do to get the baby out.
Hmm.
And that includes fundal pressure, something that I'm reflecting on from cephalic birth. It was a big no-no because so many people do
Hmm.
it too aggressively. And
Sure.
in breech birth, there's so many good reasons why fundal pressure. In fact, it's one of the three main techniques that they're using in Frankfurt.
Hmm.
Got shoulder press, lift and turn, side to side, and fundal
Hmm.
pressure. Is there ever any caution about overuse of fundal pressure, or if you've got a compromised baby, what's the benefits and risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always the possibility that any maneuver can be overused. And so I think whenever we're going to do any kind of intervention, we always have to stop ourselves for, just a few seconds and go, okay, what am I going to do and why? What is my goal here? So if we do have a compromised baby and it's just a matter of that baby coming down further and we're looking at it and we're determining, I don't think anything's hung up because it's not down far enough, but the maternal effort, especially without a pressure or without a contraction, is just not, there's just not enough oomph there at that time, either because, they're tired, or there are many reasons why the pushing effort is just not quite adequate to move that baby down, particularly because the fundus is up higher, so that uterus isn't helping as much. It's all kind of truly maternal effort without the uterus helping. And so that's when the cristellar or fundal pressure can really be beneficial in moving that compromised baby down. And I think sometimes that's the least interventive thing we can do because we're not touching the baby. And I think once we start touching the baby, then the babies tend to not like being handled. We tend to see more, of course, it's more painful for the mother if we have to go in and do any kind of maneuvers with our hands, then we're going to see more perineal trauma, all of these things. So I think fundal pressure can be, and when it's done effectively, can be very useful, very fast and very useful. I think some lesser experienced practitioners can tend to see it as, oh, this is pretty easy. This is all I have to do. You really have to know how to do it, though. It's like any other maneuver. And I have seen it virtually because I attend births virtually sometimes. People call me and ask me, will you help in case I need? And all I can do is help with my voice, not with my hands. But I've seen fundal pressure done and it has not worked. And it has not worked because it was not being done correctly. And so then I say, okay, you need to reposition and then go, and I give them specific, and then guess what? It works. So it always could work, but you have to do it correctly. So the times when people have said, well, I tried it, but it didn't work, they weren't doing it correctly. I think people think it's easy to do, and it is once you figure out how to do it, which it's a very quick learning curve, but you have to do it right, otherwise it won't work. And so that's just a little bit of a misnomer there
Is it
that oh, just press here.
is it giving enough pressure or force? That's people hesitant, do you think?
Yeah, I think part of it is enough pressure, and part of it is kind of going in and down. Like if you're doing a Heimlich maneuver, you want to go in and up for the Heimlich maneuver.
Maybe.
You're not just pressing on the butt. You can't do that. You gotta, it's that whole scoop thing. Well, it's almost the
Yeah,
opposite. With the fundal pressure, you're going in and
yeah,
down. And if you're just gonna go straight down, it's probably not gonna work
yeah.
as
It's got to
well
be
as
that
kind of
curve.
in and down.
Yeah.
hmm
Okay.
And so and it's interesting because my friend who did it and did it incorrectly the first time and it wasn't working, repositioned herself and then did it correct. She completely felt that, like she's like, oh yeah, you could feel it work. And I'm like, yeah. So it was good to have feedback from somebody who preliminarily did it incorrectly and then did it correctly the second time. So
That reminds me, it's not always something we do just with our hands. If we're using our whole body, reposition the body so we've got
yeah.
good access and a good effort from the whole
hmm
body. Because sometimes we're relying on wiggly hands, which won't do it when the body really
Yeah.
supports. I know we'll
Yeah.
keep this fairly short, this talk. In the last few minutes, I find the most important question to ask ourselves always is how do we manage our self-care? So I see pictures of you kayaking, beautiful lakes, you've got your dogs and wonderful neighbors, and you love being at home, and you're obviously traveling the
Yeah.
world doing things. So do you find you manage self-care and any recommendations on what you hear from others? Are they managing to balance their self-care? So you first.
Yeah. Yeah. I have yeah, I do all those things. And everybody has their own um, or maybe they don't, but the ones that do have their own level of self-care and their own things that they do, they're all very different, you know. For some people, they really just they enjoy spending time with them, with their families and taking time off, having very clear boundaries with clients. And so it's a little different for everybody. But I always encourage, when I'm teaching, I always encourage people to figure out what is meaningful to them in terms of what helps them sort of rejuvenate and because it is going to be very different for everyone, but it's essential so that we don't
Me, there is a
get
bit of a
burned out.
numbers game. The midwives I'm helping to defend cases are often so busy they don't get to stop to think, to eat, to drink, to look after themselves. They've got more than one woman in labour at the same time. Sometimes they don't have really
Mhm.
good recovery time between the women. They're into another case. They're being useful, and that's almost can be an addictive thing. Um,
Yes.
Gabor Mate talks about this a lot. He was a doctor with a pager. He was busy. He was important. And then when he stopped, he realized he lost connection with his family and connection with
Yep.
himself.
Yep.
And I'm wishing people to stop before they need to, because when they have a case, it's very far down the track. And a case can come out of the blue. Any baby could have congenital abnormality, nobody's fault, but you're having to answer questions for years about a case. Hopefully you're not.
No, hopefully not.
Hopefully you're outside the system, semi-retired. I don't know.
Yes, semi. I don't have my own private practice now, but I attend births. Usually it'll be a breech or some multiples here and there. I'm attending two births in August, magically somehow. If they're both far away from me, so I'm going to go to each of them to kind of wait. Neither of them are breech that I'm aware of at this point. I think they're both head down, and they're not multiples either, but they're special people. So
Right.
it's usually I don't just attend. The joke with my friends is that, yeah, don't even bother calling her if it's a head down singleton. She's just not interested.
But I bet
But
you
and
get,
we joke, but of
do you get
course I
many
am. It's an
repeat
honor to.
clients that are like friends? Do you get repeat ones?
Mhm. Yeah,
Previous
yeah,
clients,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The one is a repeat, and yeah, the other one is a daughter of a friend of mine who's a
I
midwife,
thought
and
you were going to
she
say a
doesn't
daughter
want
of
to
a
be the
woman that
midwife.
you had. Because when we get to a certain age, we will get the daughters of the women we had.
Yes,
I've just had
yes,
one.
yeah. Wow.
Let's draw it to
Yeah,
a
I know.
close
That's super special.
on such
Yeah.
a beautiful positive note. I'll end the record now,
Okay.
if that's okay. Wait, wait, first.